Marine Corps slogan is, we need a few good men. A few good men. Now, throughout history, every battle has come down to a handful of soldiers who were able to stand their ground even in the face of withering opposition. I believe that God is saying to us that He, right now, is looking for a few good men and women that's willing to stand our ground to fight the fight that we need to fight in the day of evil. A few good people. I believe that a few good people united for any cause can change the world. Have you ever heard of the 2% rule? Or maybe the 2% principle is what I think I would call it. That concept actually originated from the Campus Crusade for Christ. And this has been several years ago, and it was on the campus of the Louisiana State University. Their goal is to enlist 2% of the campus in their program, because they have discovered that with 2%, even though that seems like such a small minority, they could change the moral climate of that campus. Part of their statement reads like this: we should not underestimate the significance of a small group of people who have a vision for a just and gentle world. The governing values of a whole culture may be changed when 2% of its people have a new vision. Now just think of it. Think about that for a moment. All that we need is 2%, and we can change an entire culture. As I look at that, and as I read that in its entirety earlier, the point is very clear. It doesn't matter how many people you have, even with a small group. You can make an impact on culture. You can make an impact in your little corner of the world. You can have an impact upon society as a whole. Just a small group. And that includes us. Are we making a difference where we are? Are we a part of that 2% rule? Or do we feel like, well, little difference I can make, I'm just a bag of bone and ashes, I can't do anything. And as a result, we don't do anything. We don't stand for anything. That really brings us to the point of my text today. We're going to read Genesis, the 18th chapter, starting with verse 16 and going through verse 33. When the men got up to leave, they looked down toward Sodom, and Abraham walked away with them to see them on their way. Then the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all nations on earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him. Then the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and their sin so grievous that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know. The men turned away and went toward Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Then Abraham approached him and said, will you sweep away the wickedness, or the righteous from the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in this city? Okay, Lord, now, if there's 50 righteous people, will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous? A huge group of people. We'll talk about that number in a moment. Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will not the judge of all the earth do right? Remember that passage. Will not the judge of all the earth do what is right? The Lord said, if I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Then Abraham spoke up again. Now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, though I am nothing but dust and ashes. What if the number of the righteous is 5 less than 50? Well, do the math here. We're going from 50 now to 45. Will you destroy the whole city because of 5 people? If I find 45 there, he said, I will not destroy the land. Once again he spoke. Well, what if only 40 are found? And he said, for the sake of 40, I will not destroy the land. So we started at 50, and we're down to 45, and now we're down to 40. And then he said, may the Lord not be angry, but let me speak. What if only 30? He keeps going down to 30 now. Can be found there. He answered, I will not do it. I will not destroy the land. I will not destroy Sodom if there are 30 righteous people. Abraham said, now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, what if only 20? What if only 20 can be found there? And he said, for the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. And then he said, may the Lord not be angry, but let me speak just one more time. What if only 10? What if only 10 can be found? He answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy the land. Then when the Lord had finished speaking with Abraham, he left and Abraham returned home. So you get the picture of what is taking place here. Abraham is pleading with God for Sodom to be spared. And if I could just give a real quick general outline of what we just read. God inspects a city, happens to be Sodom. As he inspects it, the sin of that city is so great that he has determined to destroy the land. And then Abraham intercedes on behalf of the people, the righteous anyway, with God, asking him to spare the city on behalf of the righteous that are there in the city. Now, when you look at that and you read that, actually, I almost began to draw a smile on my face when I started reading this. It's almost like Abraham is trying to negotiate with God. They only start out with 50, and then they get all the way down to 10. But Abraham asked God to spare the city. There's only 45, and then 40, and then 30, and then 20, all the way down to 10. Well, would God spare Sodom for the sake of 10 righteous people? Would he? The answer is yes. God said he would do that. So for 10 people, the great city of Sodom could actually be spared. Now, archaeologists tell us that based upon the ruins that they have been able to dig up, in Abraham's time, the city of Sodom was estimated to have a population of 250,000 people. A little bit bigger than Owenston, okay? 250,000 people. Yet, it could be spared. It could be spared under what circumstances? What's the provision? What's the condition? If 10 people, 10 righteous people, can be found. But was it spared? Do you know the rest of the story? Well, you really have to get into the next chapter to get into that, okay? And we may do that sometime soon. Now, when I look at this passage, and I've told you many times, I'll usually read that one passage right there, probably 10 times in a week. And I look at other supporting passages what happened before then, so that I can get a better, clear picture of exactly what's going on. When I do that, I see right here in this passage the character of God. And I see the central part of who God really is. We look at this and we have to acknowledge that God is knowledge. He knows all. He knows everything that's going on with every one of those 250,000 people. He knows the sin of Sodom. In fact, verse 20 told us that he had heard the outcry of the city. God sees all. God knows all. God saw all and knew all back then. And guess what? God sees all and knows all now and all the time in between. God knows. God has that knowledge. But we see that, and he sees every injustice in all the world. God knows that. That's just a part of his character. God knows every instance of injustice that's ever been committed. Whether it's in our own personal lives, whether it's been to us, or by us, or because of us, God knows all of that. But this passage also says something about God's justice. Folks, God is not winking at sin. You know, we like to think that God's just going to turn his head. God's not going to look at that. It's going to be okay. We want to believe. We want to believe in the midst of our wrong that God is going to just wink at it. Okay, I see it, but I don't see it, okay? And right here's a prime example that God does not wink at sin. There's consequences for that. God's not going to say, well, boys will be boys. That's okay. Live and let live. We see God's justice right here. And you know what we can say about God will always do what is right. I want to do what is right. I think all of us here want to do what's right. I don't always do that. You don't either. But I can count on this truth. God will always do what is right. Even if I don't think it's right. Even if I don't want it to be that way, God is always going to do what's right. Now, Abraham's whole prayer is based upon that question that we saw there in verse 25. Will not the judge of all the earth, who's the judge of all the earth? You? God. Will not the judge of all the earth do what is right? That's the whole premise, that one prayer right there. Now, from this story, we can certainly learn a powerful lesson about God's mercy. When he heard the outcry of the city, the outcry of Sodom's sin, he personally came down to investigate the case, to see if it was really as bad as he'd been told. Now, God's all-knowing. Don't you think God already knew that? I'm sure he did. But God is revealing himself in a very special way here, as we see there in verse 20. Now, furthermore, he allows Abraham to intercede. And so what? Well, the point that makes that so strong is he allows Abraham to intercede when he could have gone on and destroyed the land. The sin was there. The evil and the wickedness was there. But he still allowed Abraham, the great faithful Abraham, to intercede. God had all the power to destroy it then. And we see God's mercy so clearly, at least in this one fact, that he could have spared the city if only there were 10 righteous people. Not just 10 people, 10 righteous people. And then finally, this passage teaches something about how crucial righteousness is. And the fact that righteousness can save a city. God was willing to save the city. God was willing not to destroy it on the basis of somebody, 10 somebodies, being righteous. Started out as 50. So we see again a little bit of the mercy of God from 50 all the way down to 10. Now, when Abraham and God had gotten finished with this dialogue and this discussion here, the bottom line was this. There'll be 10 righteous people here. Sodom will not be destroyed. That's the bottom line of that conversation. All I need is 10. 10. Just 10 could save the land. Now, folks, I really think that there ought to be 10 righteous people in a city of 250,000 people. That kind of makes me wonder if we could find 10 righteous people here among us. If it couldn't be 10 among 250,000, what does that say? You know, Proverbs 14:24 says, righteousness exalts a nation. Righteousness uplifts a nation. But sin is a reproach. Sin is a shame and a disgrace to any person. And then Proverbs 28:12 reminds us that when the righteous triumph, there is a great elation. But when the wicked rise to power, men go hiding. Okay, so what am I trying to say? Have you been able to piece the puzzle together thus far to see what direction I'm trying to go in? What I'm really saying is, I think that there's a time for us to stand on what we say we believe. This is a time for us to stand up and to be counted. A question that comes up in many conversations anymore just seems to be, well, how can we as Christians really speak out on moral issues? And how do we do that? And that's really a sermon in itself. But you might ask, would Sodom have been a better place if Lot had spoken out? If Lot himself had spoken out, instead of apparently going along with the moral debauchery that was going on in the land. I'm not sure about the moral decay in that land, but certainly it wasn't good. What about the moral decay in our land today? Are we as Christians obligated to speak up against that? Are we as Christians obligated to stand for what we say we believe? Or in church, we just believe it? Because we're supposed to believe it here. But beyond the perimeters of this building, our beliefs and our convictions seem to be something else. I guess the question that I have to ask myself, and since I'm asking myself, I just thought it'd be just as convenient to ask you. If we don't stand for what we say we believe, if we don't stand for the things that are right, then who's going to? Who else is obligated to? If we don't stand for what is right. If we unite ourselves with others who share the same concerns and the same beliefs and the same convictions, I believe that we can have a great impact. That 2% principle, I think, really comes into play here. If we band ourselves together, we can do a lot of good for our homes, our communities, our schools, our nation. Just 2%. When the great moral issues that we have are at stake and we remain silent, it's almost like a treason. It's almost like a betrayal on what we say we believe in the teachings of God's Word. But by speaking out, we can show how the gospel really can have an impact upon the lives of people who do not know what the gospel is all about. And then when we share our testimonies, I'm not just talking about staying behind a pulpit like we've done here and had different people. I'm talking about the things that you do every day out there in the marketplace with people. How you tell others how God is at work in your life. What He's done for me. What He's doing. How I see God at work in my life. When I do that and you do that, and that has the ripple effect out there in the community, and then we back up what we say by what we do, then it does have an impact. And if just 2% of us could do that, I believe that we'd be able to see the effects of that. See, I believe that, and you know my convictions about this, because I think I got tainted when I was a little kid. But I think being able to share your testimony and talk about your faith and your convictions with a winsome kind of spirit. Well, I don't go around with a 2-ton Bible underneath my arm pointing religion down somebody's throat. Well, that might work for some, but it didn't work for me. But just simply saying, hey, this is what God has done. This is what God can do. And if we pledge to be a part of that 2% principle, then I believe we can see a big change. See, our great need today, as I look at it and just sort of step back and just try to analyze, I think those two needs lie in two specific categories. One of them is moral courage, and the other one is commitment to prayer. And we see where Abraham had that commitment to prayer. We need to have the courage to stand up for what we say we believe in. And we need to commit ourselves to prayer. Because our words and our actions will really not come to anything. It won't mean anything if we don't have the help of heaven. If we don't have the help of God, if we don't have the leadership of the Holy Spirit. Now, in closing out, let me say I've got some good news for you. But I've got some bad news too. What do you want first? Okay, I'm going to give you the good news, okay? But now the good news is really, really good news, okay? The good news is we can make a difference. Do you believe that? Do you believe that you, as an individual, can make a difference? Shake your head one way or another, okay? Well, there's some that's going in circles here, okay? All right. But I think the majority says, yes, I believe I can make a difference. Anytime there's a few people united for any cause, it can make a change for the good. Well, this passage makes it very clear. I don't know that I've ever seen it this way before. But as I study it, I believe it. This passage makes it very clear that it is not the presence of evil that we're looking at right here, but it's the absence of good that brings about God's judgment. It was the absence of good. 10 good, righteous people, they weren't there. And it was the absence of good, not so much the presence of evil, it was the absence of good that brought about God's judgment. And to think that, my goodness, 10 people, righteous people, could have made the difference. 10 righteous people could have saved Sodom. And I believe that God really wanted to spare that city. I think that's why he went from 50 and agreed to go all the way down to 10. But I think he also knew that there weren't 10 righteous people there. They weren't there to be found. So, what does God see? What does God see when he looks in our home? What does God see when he looks at our own individual lives? What does God see when he looks in our churches? What does God see when he looks in our communities? What does God see when he looks at our nation? You know, I would like to think, God, come on down. I've got 10 righteous people here in the church, okay? I know I do. But I've got to ask myself, which one of the 10 would be in that righteous group? Well, maybe we have more, I don't know. But on the flip side, there's a possibility. Preacher, you might think you got 10 righteous people in your church. I've got news for you. You ain't got that many. Kind of makes you think when you see 250,000 people and couldn't find 10 righteous. And as a result, the city was destroyed. See, I believe that what we need to be doing is making an impact upon lives for all eternity. My blessing for each of you is this. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen. So today I'm going to be talking about the home and our responsibilities as adults in the home with our children. And with that, I say our grandchildren and other people that we might